Hello guys, this week's episode of BackChat is a very special one and close to my heart. Late last year we sat down with Michael Turner, Mick Turner of the Geelong Falcons Footy Factory, Geelong Football Club legend, and we're lucky enough to speak about everything footy and life. Mick, a little bit like me, was a straight up and down, black and white sort of guy. Didn't like to mix his words and told people what he thought. That's why I respected him, and that's why we got along so well. He played such a huge part in my personal development as a footy player and as a young man. Sadly, we lost Mick to his long health battles late last year, and out of respect, we felt like we should hold this interview until the timing was right. At the time of recording, Karen, his wife, was in the room, and I've spoken to Karen and the family, and really feel like this chat with Mick is absolutely worth putting into the world. Not only do we get his footy insights, he's seen a lot in the footy world, but we get to speak about life and death a little bit, which, although can be a heavy topic, it was something that was important to Mick and something we certainly shared a mutual respect around, given the closeness of our families. We really hope you enjoy this chat. This is a celebration of Mick Turner, who has impacted not only myself, but a lot of young footballers in the Geelong area through his time as a player and a manager at the Geelong Falcons. Vale Mick Turner. Righto, here we go. BackChat powered by Paywise. This interview, I am very excited to chat to this man. It's come out of nowhere, really. I think he got into town yesterday, gave me a little message, and here we are sitting down for a chat. Mick Turner joins me on the podcast. G'day, Mick. How are you?
Yeah, thanks, Will. Good to see you again, mate. It's been a long time, but we've got a bit of history there, so it's good to be here.
It's good. A good Geelong man. Really looking forward to getting through a bit of stuff with you, Mick. But we start every podcast the same way. So you may not know this, but we ask the same question to every guest we have on the podcast.
Okay.
I know you've been a great footballer. I know you're in the team of the century, right? On the other wing to your father. I know you've played over 200 games for the Geelong Cats. I know you run the Mick Turner Footy Factory down the Geelong Falcons, developing youth for the last 25 years. I know all that. I know you've done a lot of things in footy, but I would like to know your greatest sporting achievement, not to do with football. Have you been good at any other sports, or are you just a footballer? I know you like your surfing down in Lorne.
No. Well, when I was younger and a bit like you, when I was going through college and all those sorts of things, I was a good athlete, So, but there wasn't the opportunities back then. But I used to run in Melbourne at Olympic Park, in the athletics, 100 metres and
you're sprinter.
The hurdles and high jump. High jump, I jumped 6'7" at one stage. So it's a fair height.
That's big.
So, you think back on your career and, if I had my time again, I'd certainly, be involved in the football, but I would have liked to have given athletics a crack a bit earlier on, like the decathlon or something like that, where the edge is off, the 100-metre sprint, you're not against the best sprinters, but you lay it off over 10 different events. And for most of those events, I could do the hurdles and sprint and the 1500 and the high jump and all that. I might have struggled with the javelin or the discus or those heavy lifting events, but I would have liked to have had a go at that. So that's, early days it was more athletics for me.
I like it. So that's thanks to TABtouch. That's a very nice little athletics. Tommy, I, of course, was a good athlete back in my day. Mick, I was under 9 state hurdling champion, 800-metre runner. Our mate BT used to stuff that up all the time. He used to say 400s. I was an 800 runner, Mick.
Well, you were an elite runner, and someone asked me the question this morning when I told them I was coming in to have a talk to you and about the draft year that you came through. And people forget this, but AFL clubs are very conservative, and when we were running the Geelong Falcons for the AFL, when your name came up, nothing's perfect for a 17, 18-year-old, and everyone knew you were a great athlete, and that's one of the reasons you got drafted. But there was a bit of a knock on your kicking. Do you remember that?
Yep.
It's a bit of a knock on your kick, and there was a knock on Jimmy Bartellis, a kick and all that sort of stuff, and Luke Hodge wasn't quick enough. But in the end, if players have got the right attitude and they work really hard and work within their limitations on the ground, well, you can be a very successful player.
I'm really interested to get into that with you, and I might actually stay there with you, Mick, around recruitment and around what people see in players. So I'm now coaching down at Aquinas College. I think we'll win the cup this year, first one in about 15 years. So exciting stuff down with Shane Woden, Brownlow medalist at Aquinas. So someone probably of note, like they've got some great players, Nat Fyfe, Elliot Yeo, but Chad Warner is someone that was out of that school, and he was picked up 30, 40 because he couldn't kick. right? And he wasn't fit enough. So we look at him now.
Yeah.
He's one of the Brownlow medal favourites. He seems like he can kick. He seems like he's fit enough. Talent acquisition, I find it's always been a riddle and a mystery. Like how does that not get on him, and then where he is today? Like what makes that?
There's two things. As I said to you before, I think AFL clubs are very conservative in their views on young players, and they want the perfect. They want the perfect person or the perfect athlete. And I had, obviously many discussions over 25 years with AFL clubs. What used to happen in the system, and it got more complex as time went on, we used to gather a lot of data about players, on computer through champion data and all that sort of stuff. And we used to do our own extensive fitness testing. And AFL clubs would come around pre-season and you'd go through your list with them and say, look, these players we think could get drafted. They might get rookied, and you need to keep an eye on this kid, Ollie Henry, for example, at Geelong. He's a maturing player, and he could turn into something really good as a 17-year-old. So there's all that. And then the AFL clubs would watch the season progress. All their games were filmed and make their own conclusions on it. Then they'd come back at the end of the year and go through the list again. But when they come back and go through the list again, like West Coast or Fremantle, they'll talk about the players that they're interested in, who will fit their list profile, because, they're not going to, if they've got a lot of midfielders, they don't want to talk about Jimmy Bartell so much, although that's just an example. They should have. But depending on what their list profile is, they'll talk about the players. So you get a bit of an indication who they're interested in and who's got a good chance of getting drafted. So after, most clubs, look, out of the 18 clubs, you'd probably do interviews with 15 of them. Some clubs were a bit strange. Adelaide are a very strange club. I've always been a strange club, Adelaide.
Bateson down there?
Well, no, Kinnear's now at Sydney, but Adelaide have always been a bit secretive. And you know what South Australians are like. They think they invented football when they really didn't. And they don't give you much to South Australians. And they do make some very, very funny draft selections, when I study it. So at the end of the year, we'd go through it all again. You get a fair indication who is getting drafted. But there's no perfect player. And it's interesting when players come through, like Darcy Parish came through the Falcons. My wife, Karen, used to teach him out at Winchelsea Primary School when she was principal. But when he turned 18, for example, to give you a snapshot of it, when he turned 18, he's a country boy and he's out having a drink with his mates, and a few blokes put on photos on Facebook. And the AFL clubs obviously look at all that stuff, and we do too. We track them to make sure they're not doing anything too outlandish. And the AFL club started ringing me and saying, what's going on with Darcy Parish? And I said, what do you mean what's going on with Darcy Parish? He's playing really well on that. He said, no, what about Facebook? He's there with a pot in his hand drinking beer. Like, the old man's a shearer. They come from Winchelsea. They're pretty knockabout family. And I said, well, what's the issue there? It's his 18th birthday. He's just having a few drinks with his mates. And they didn't like it. You know what I mean? I said, look, are you after a footballer or a choir boy? Like Luke Hodge was pretty loose too.
Yep.
And he turned into a really good player. Like he's generally loose.
Yep.
And
Jonathan Brown can play. Jonathan Brown. Have a beer.
Jonathan Brown used to drink cans from our games in Melbourne. Like, we'd play a game at Dandenong or something like that, and my development manager, Alan Thompson, would drive the Warrnambool boys and Camperdown boys back to where they were. And Jonathan Brown used to drink cans. I didn't find this the fact after until he got drafted.
Was he 17?
He was 17. He would drink cans going back to Warrnambool and then go out with his mates in Warrnambool. Now, I didn't know it at the time. I found out afterwards. So it's that old balance between, do you want someone who's got a bit of mongrel in him, and which they have, and they're going to be really competitive footballers, or do you want a choir boy sort of thing? So AFL clubs are after that perfect person, perfect player, which doesn't exist, and they've got to balance it up. And I get it, because people get sacked if they make the wrong calls, but there's 5 things that make a great AFL player or a great football at any level. Number 1 is attitude, and that's a whole range of things. So, is he coachable? Does he listen to the staff? Is he respectful? Does he train hard? Is he courageous? A whole lot of those things. And then the next one is, in a football game, depending on what position he plays, can he get the football? Yeah. So obviously a midfielder needs to get it more often than the person playing in the back pocket. And when he gets the ball, does he have influence on the game?
Is he smart?
You can make massive influence on the game and only get 10 possessions. It depends on what position you're playing in. Then once he gets the ball, does he make the right decision? Okay, so you're in the back line. You're in the grand final. There's only a couple of minutes to go. You're going to leave your man and run up the field and have that great passage of play that West Coast had when you won the premiership. Do you remember it?
Yeah.
When you remember you running up the field, the ball had turned over, you were gone, weren't you?
Correct.
Because you wouldn't have got back to your man.
Correct.
So it's that decision-making thing. So can he make the right decision during a game? And then the 4th thing is when you make your decision and you got your ball in your hand, can you handball it or kick it sufficiently to not turn over the ball and make a creative decision during the game with your skills? And the last thing is your athleticism. So the athleticism is, in your case, you're a great middle distance runner. You're very, very quick. Have you got endurance? Have you got speed, repeat? And if you go through it and you mark people on those 5 attributes and you mark them out of 10, you get a score of 50. So someone like, we'll get Luke Hodge for a start. Attitude, you'd mark him 9. Decision-making, 9. Get the ball, 9. Skills, 9. Athleticism, probably about a 7, maybe a 6 or 7. But the intangible thing in recruiting, and what I used to do is speed is not only speed on the ground, it's also speed in your head. So you've got to be able to read the football. So someone like a Luke Hodge could be a little bit slower or not super quick because he made really good decisions. He could read the play and he'd go, make that decision before his men went. So it's a pretty complex industry. It gets more complex every year. But AFL recruiters, that's just the way they play. And I had to sell the player, and they probably were more inclined to be pulling them apart.
Right. So this is all to do with your time at the Geelong Falcons. 1995, you were tasked with that mission to set up a talent pathway effectively to develop young kids in Geelong. Is that right?
Yeah. So what happened was the under-19s was stopped in Victoria, and that was a good thing because AFL clubs had zones. So, for example, Carlton had around the Bendigo zone, Geelong had the Geelong area and up the Murray and all that sort of stuff. And AFL clubs, depending on how much money they had, for example, Carlton, who were a very wealthy club, in Collingwood, they worked their zones really well and got a lot of players out of their zones. Where I came from in Warrnambool, it was with Fitzroy, and they didn't have a lot of money at all. So there wasn't a lot of development being done down in the what was called the Handham area around Warrnambool and Colac and Camperdown and those areas. So the under-19s was dismantled in about 1992, and they started what was called the TAC Cup in those days, and the TAC Cup clubs ran those regions, so they did all the development in the region. So Auskick, coach education, school football, all of those things, as well as the talent pathway. So we had 2 under-15 teams, an under-16 team, an under-18 team, and then down the track we obviously had a girls team as well. So there was a lot of staff, a lot of players, and a lot of hard work. But our job was to develop talent in that area, and at the highest level, the best players would go on and play AFL, but a lot of players would go and play VFL, and the majority of players would go back to their local clubs, hopefully better for the experience from what they'd learned in the program.
Early days, what were the challenges? What were challenges of going from a system, the under-19s, which you correct me if I'm wrong, but the sort of the AFL clubs or the VFL clubs would have a under-19s that you would sort of be aligned with, and that's how it would work. What were the challenges for you sort of changing that system?
Look, firstly, getting the right staff in place. You've got to get staff. I suppose in my job, being the boss or the talent manager, they used to call it, I used to get a little bit of kudos, especially from Brian Taylor on Channel 7 now and again with the Footy Factory thing.
Mick Turner Footy Factory.
Yeah, but look, in the end, we had, it ran just like an AFL club. If I can get to the end of it, we had 55 staff, so working for us part-time. So they weren't full-time. I was full-time, but we had departments just like we had, you have in an AFL club. So I was the CEO, for example, or the talent manager. I had a football department, coaching department, a high-performance department, medical, women's or girls team, the under-16s, recruiting department, everything that an AFL club has. And we had 55 staff, but it was a part-time program because all the kids were at school, whether they be boys or girls, and our staff were part-time. So we used to start setting up for training, say, at Heighton Reserve on training days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it was, at 2:00. And then when the players finished school, they'd roll in and get their weights done before training, and then train and have their meetings and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty, by the end of the program, it was run basically like a part-time AFL club, and we got all the same sort of information AFL clubs do. Like champion data would give us all the stats, and all the games were filled, and the players, we all had computers, and the coaches would, same as an AFL club, they do your edits at your AFL club and all those sorts of things. So they do individual player edits, you do line edits like your midfield, back line, forward line, and any problem areas you wanted to do. So it was really well set up in the end, and unfortunately COVID hit and it all got dismantled.
Yeah, it did. Mm-hmm. I want to circle back on the Geelong Falcons, but I think we've skipped ahead because people who don't know Michael Turner and aren't Geelong people like you and I wouldn't know the career you had as a football player. So 245 games for the Geelong Cats.
Yep.
Named on the wing in the team of the century, opposite your old man, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Right? Your old man, Leo, on one wing, you on the other of the Geelong team of the century. So you had a bloody ripping AFL career.
Yeah, well, it was early days then. It was 1974 when I started, and people ask you, how much money you got paid in 1974. Well, I was working for my father in Warren. We're getting $40 a week, and he gave me a car to drive around in. And Geelong's offered to me when I went down, it was $40 a game, $20 in the seconds because they had the reserves in those days, and I stayed at my grandmother, so they paid my board there, which was $10, and they actually put me through teachers' college. So I was a bit lucky to go. Yeah, they paid for my university fees and all those sorts of things, and then.
Right.
You wind up 15 years later when I retired, and I was probably on about 4,000 a game. So I was on 80 grand playing, and I wasn't full time then. I was also a teacher, so I was on 40,000 teaching. So basically, my football wage was always double my working wage. So 40,000 teaching, 80,000 playing. So I was on 120 grand, which back in 1988 was a fair bit of money. But like a lot of young people complain about now, that I can't afford to buy a house, and I get all that. But in those days, we were paying 18% interest on our mortgages. It's a lot of money, isn't it? 18%. Yeah. And any of my money I earned in football, anything you earned over 30,000, which was my teaching wage, or 35,000, you were paying 60 cents in the dollar.
Right.
So you were losing a lot of money on your interest rate on your mortgage and also on your tax. So times are a bit different then. But look, the life of a footballer in those days, Karen and I were married when we started having kids in Ocean Grove. So I was up in the morning at, say, 7 o'clock or whatever time I got up, driving to Geelong, get into a carpool with other people, drive to Werribee and teach all day. So tore it up in Werribee, come back to Geelong in the carpool, go to football training, train till about, because, with our part-time footballers, we'd start training about 5:30, 6 o'clock, train through till about 8, 8:30, get home at 9, have some dinner, go to bed, get up the next day and do the same thing again. So it's just different times. So,
it was the way it was, though. Yeah. You didn't look at it as that school of hard knocks. That's just what you had to do to play footy, right? You go from a young player playing for the Cats, and you captain the club during your career. So, what did you learn as a player then to then, that you took after the fact that you took after your career to do with the Falcons? Like you spent a long time in an AFL club or a VFL club.
I think the thing you learn is in life, and it changes all the time, but the thing in life is just get your job done, and just whether it's you personally or whatever your responsibilities are, if you're capable of doing it, you just got to get your job done. So, when I was at the Falcons, especially early days, I worked very, very long hours, and people in football clubs do, work long hours, particularly administration. They do work really long hours, and there's a bit of it is obviously a stress attached to it, especially at AFL level because you're so highly scrutinised. But I think look, it is what it is, and probably back in those days, I'm going, geez, how good am I? I'm teaching in Werribee getting, back in the early days, 25 grand. I'm playing football getting 50. Like, how good's this? I'm driving around Geelong in an Alfa Romeo, a brand new Alfa Romeo. And
what colour?
It was red and custom built, and, it is what it is.
Was that good, Karen? Was that impressive? It was a lair. Yeah. Karen's watching along right now. She's not impressed.
So things progress all the time. The same will happen in AFL football now. I mean, it's even getting to the stage now where players, and these players are on a contract. The average contract now for an AFL player on an AFL list is about 400 grand, which is a lot of money. But there's also scope if you get to a certain level to do marketing within your own club, do marketing for the AFL now because they've got a pool of money for about 35 million. Yeah. And if you've got a good manager, there's scope to do it outside that as well. So if you're very, very successful over a 10-year period, and look, let's use Dustin Martin's example. Dustin's done really well, been an elite player for a long time, and he's invested really well in commercial real estate and will probably never have to work again. But the next player coming through, and let's say that's Tanner Bruin at Geelong, who I only just ran into before, the Tanner Bruin at Geelong, if he can get to that level and play for 10 years, and get into that, getting paid for football, but also on the marketing side, there's going to be scope there for players at AFL level within Australia to make a lot of money.
How do you reflect back on your career? Now, my family, long suffering Geelong fans through that period. 1964, I think, was the previous premiership before 2007. Yep. All of my family had jumped on West Coast because I was drafted at the end of 2006, so they missed Geelong premierships. Yep. But you had a successful side.
Yeah, look, it was
70s and 80s.
It was a battle for a lot of it at Geelong. I found Geelong as a club when I think back, they were pretty dysfunctional, and I think a lot of VFL, AFL clubs were at that time. So, I just look back, they made a lot of, I reckon, bad decisions, which cost us. But look, we had very good sides in the early 80s. We played in the preliminary final in 1980 under Billy Goggin, and we played. I still remember we played Richmond just before the finals, and we got top of the ladder. And there was 90,000 at the MCG, and we played Richmond. Karen was there barracking me on, weren't you, Kaz? And 90,000 there, and we beat Richmond just before the finals at the MCG, which suited us. And as the draw worked out, we also had Waverley Park in those days. Waverley was a big ground, and didn't probably suit our side at that time. And there were some bad decisions made by Geelong in selection, and we got beaten by, I think, Richmond at Waverley the first final, and went for the preliminary final at Waverley, and Collingwood, I think they beat us. I played that game. They beat us by about 4 points. So we just missed. I reckon if we had got to the grand final against Richmond on the MCG, that was the day Kevin Bartlett, I think, kicked 8. We had a bloke that could play on him called Stephen Lunn, who would have done a really good job on him. I think if we had got to the grand final, then we would have been a good chance of winning a premiership. And then the next year, to get us that next step, because we lacked a key forward and we lacked probably a midfielder. That was the time when Brian Peake, who's a legend over here,
absolutely, and
played for East Fran on Fremantle.
Brett's father.
Yeah, Brett's father. And look, Brian Peake was a great player, and he's a great player for East Fremantle, and he's a great state player. Like, we used to come over here back in the day, and it's one of the things that footballers miss now, unlike rugby. State of origin was really big, and we'd come and play at Subiaco. There'd be a massive crowd, and you play against Western Australia, and Brian Peake was an absolute star. So Geelong went and got Gary Sidebottom to play in the forward line, and also Brian Peake to play in the midfield. But the next year, I unfortunately got injured in the finals, and they played, and exactly the same thing happened. We went to Waverley again in the preliminary final, and I think we got beaten by 8 points. So it was really disappointing,
So what you're telling me, there was scheduling issues back in the day as well. People carrying on about the fixture and equality. Bloody Geelong was like the interstate club back then. So you blokes used to get stitched up.
Well, it's just, look, they used to do the draw, and it wasn't a final 8 like it is now. It was a final 5, final 4, final 5 went to a final 6. But it was just the scheduling. If we had got scheduled to play at the MCG, we didn't lose a game at the MCG. Just with our team, Waverley just didn't suit us for some reason. And on the way, and when I say the club was a bit dysfunctional, like, it was just the messages given to players. It wouldn't happen now. So on the way to that game in 1981, everyone was picked up by a bus at Cardinia Park, and they marked them off on the bus. Our coach Billy Goggin used to play games with players a bit, and he actually dropped Gary Sidebottom for that game. It's quite a famous story.
Tell her.
And to try and to get him up a bit, like, if you ever get dropped, well, you get a bit angry about it, don't you?
I was dropped enough.
Yeah, well, I used to I didn't get dropped very often, but when I got dropped, I got pretty dirty about it. And it used to actually make me play better.
Yes.
Like a bit of a kick up the bum. And Billy used to play that game with me a little bit, our coach Billy Goggin, and he tried it on Gary Sidebottom. And Gary Sidebottom was supposed to be picked up out at Lara on the way to Melbourne because he had a farm out there. But no one rang Gary Sidebottom and said, make sure you're on the bus. So Billy Goggin drops him. The bus picks up the players at Cardinia Park, drives out to a couple of places and picks up players, gets to Lara where they're supposed to pick up Gary Sidebottom. There's no Gary Sidebottom. So they can't wait around.
There's no mobile phone.
There's no mobile phones in those days. There's no pick up your iPhone. So the bus continues on to... This is actually quite a good story. So the bus continues on to Waverley without Gary Sidebottom.
Was he playing or emergency?
He would have been playing. 100%. They were playing games, to try and get his anger up. But now he's a West Australian too, poor old Gary. He died a few years ago, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But so, and he was a great state player for Western Australia, and he's a good player for St Kilda. And at Geelong, he just obviously said, stuff here, I'm not getting on the bus, which I find a bit extraordinary. So the segue to that story is we had emergencies in those days, and one of our emergencies was a bloke called Peter Johnson, who came from Melbourne, and he was quite a good centre-half forward, could mark the ball, really good mark, but he wasn't a great kick. And Jono won't mind me saying that. He was a bit of an ordinary kick. So he was named emergency. So him and Murray Whitcomb and the other emergency, I can't remember what it was, came down to Geelong on the bus to see if there's been any change. Someone was sick and they're in the side, and they said, no, you're not in the side. You can drive to the game. We're going on the bus. So in those days, people used to always call into Werribee to get something to eat. So the standard thing was you go and get a steak sandwich and maybe a thick shake and those sort of things. So Peter Johnson and the boys pull into Werribee. Peter Johnson was quite a big eater. He went and got chicken and chips, half a chicken and a whopping big load of chips and a big thick shake. And they proceed to go to Waverley. So we get to Waverley, again, no mobile phones. The team's arrived. There's no Gary Sidebottom. The team manager sent out to the car park, which is quite a big car park at Waverley in those days, to find Peter Johnson, because he's playing in the side. We need a centre-half forward. So he's the emergency coming in. They end up finding him. They've had a couple of bets in Werribee because he used to like the races. So he's had half a chicken, a bloody massive big plate full of chips, a thick shake, and had a few bets on the Flemington races on the way up. So he's 9 on the game. The team manager's out there looking for him. They finally find him with about 20 minutes before the game. He comes in and gets changed, and we get him ready, put him out on the ground in a massive big preliminary final in 1981 at Waverley in front of 80,000 people. You know what his stats were? 1 handball. So just one of those crazy
What's the lesson
things
there,
that
Mick?
happen.
Don't drop people before a
Well, tell them. At least tell them they're emerging. Tell them they've got to be on the bus. But yeah, crazy stuff.
That's very good. So yeah, you don't win that flag, but I don't think that defines careers. Although we're probably going to talk about it when you name it. Well, I've always had that
argument, Will. It's interesting because when they identified players, how good players were individually, whether it be the AFL Hall of Fame or your own club's Hall of Fame, because you won a Brownlow doesn't necessarily mean you're a better player than someone else. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And because you played, so I've got to be careful what I say here because I don't get anyone to step. So
you're usually pretty just honest, aren't you, mate?
Well, let's say Shane Woewode. Now, Shane Woewode was a really good player, but he had one really outstanding year at Melbourne and won a Brownlow. Now, you wouldn't remember his name, but there's a bloke called Jeff Rains that played for Richmond who was an absolutely fantastic player, premiership player. What happens is that players get rated on those sorts of things, and we'll get into the AFL Hall of Fame, and someone who hasn't done it doesn't get into the AFL Hall of Fame. So there's a lot of examples of that. And also, if you're playing a premiership, doesn't mean you're a better player than someone else. So let's say someone like, and I'm not knocking him either, Kenny Hunter was a great player at Carlton, and he played in lots of premierships at Carlton, and he's a very highly rated player. Because he's played in a premiership doesn't make him a better player than, say, Bruce Nankervis, who played at Geelong on the back flank, that sort of thing. Or the same goes with club best and fairest. I think when you're rating players, you just rate players on how good they were as players individually, and you rate teams on how good they were as individuals. So, yeah, there's a bit of controversy, I think, on some of those sort of things.
That's good. Well done. One answered. So your time as Geelong Falcons, which we touched on a bit. So you finish up your career. When did you finish playing footy? What year did you play footy?
I went from 74, came up from Audible to 88. So 15 years. And I had... I should have played more games. The AFL count 245 Geelong. Then I played 12 state games for Victoria, and I think it was 13 night games because they had a night competition back in those days on a Tuesday night. So it was actually 270. So unfortunately, just a bit short of 300, which would have been nights to get. But as we do, I had both my Achilles reconstructed, so that put me out for a year. Had a knee reconstruction, put me out for another year. Another, broken bones and arms and all that sort of stuff. So probably missed 80 to 100 games, I think, with injury, but which was disappointing. But yeah, look, it is what it is, and you suck it up and just do the best you can. And look, you sort of alluded to it before about people's careers. When I look back on my career, I should have done better, 100%. And I'm not building myself up too much, and my wife Karen would say the same thing. If we were playing Richmond or Collingwood at the MCG in front of 85,000, I would be near best on the ground. Just because I get excited about it. So I was one of those players that I had to be really excited, and I wasn't a footy head. Like, I was a surfer, came from Warrnambool. I was a good athlete. I played footy because I was good at it. So that's the direction I went in. You know what I mean? I was never going to go to the Olympics, and I wasn't going to be Wayne Lynch and any of those sort of great surfers in my era and be a surfer. I would have liked to have been in a rock band because I used to play the drums. I would have liked to have been in, I don't know, in Excess or something like that, or play the drums for David Bowie's band, but that wasn't going to happen either. So because of your talent in one area, you sort of go towards football. But when I look back on my football career, I would say categorically I should have 100% done better. I did very well, and I did very well in big games. If there was a big game on or a final or a big game at the MCG or wherever, I'd always play well. But if I went out to the Western Bulldogs ground, the Western Oval, and there were 7,000 people there and it was raining, I'd play pretty ordinary because my, arousal level probably wasn't high enough. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's good.
Or my emotional level wasn't high enough, and I wasn't as prepared as well. So I was, at an early age, I was pretty inconsistent. As I got older, and was captain of the club and had more responsibilities and those things, I got more consistent in my game. So that's a good lesson to everyone, you know. And professional footballers these days, because it's their profession, they get ready for every game, you know what I mean? And you've got to be up and you've got to be going. So so if I look back, the biggest disappointment to me was I should have, as an individual, probably been more consistent and done better. And
that you weren't a rock star. So interesting you mentioned that. Just doing a bit of research to chat to you today, I came across the Footy Favourites album where I believe at the time they got one player from each club to do some sort of, I'm not sure what it was. Yeah. And you, if you wanted to be a rock star, you went with I Go to Rio. Is that right?
Well, it wasn't my choice. What happened was the rugby players in Sydney had done an album, of Footy Favourites, and I think it sold quite well. So they approached the AFL, VFL then, and certain players to cut this album. So we had a player from each VFL club in those days. So there were 12 clubs in Victoria. So Ray Shaw did it for Collingwood, Calvin Templeton did it for the Western Bulldogs, and Trevor Barker, obviously he looked like a rock star. He was from St Kilda, he did his, and I did the Geelong one. And I still remember going up to the studio, and I was a bit of a David Bowie, Lou Reed fan. I really liked that music. So this is going to be great. I'll be able to go up and sing David Bowie's Space Oddity or Lou Reed Walk on the Wild Side and all that sort of stuff, you know, thinking this is my big chance. So we go up there and it was all pre-recorded. And then I get Peter Allen's I Go to Rio, you know. Do you remember Peter Allen on stage with his tight pants and his maracas or his knackers or whatever you want to call them, shaking those and dancing around? He was married to Liza Minnelli, wasn't he?
Oh, he was doing okay.
On one stage, yeah. But he was gay. And I'm not being homophobic. Okay. He was gay, and the song probably didn't suit me all that much. And I wasn't that rap when they said you're going to be singing I Go to Rio. And I said, do I really have to sing that? No, it's all pre-recorded. You got to do it. So I remember sitting in the studio. We had a big night. Barry Round was there. Remember Big Bazza? Yeah. And he was doing it for the Swans.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
He actually wasn't a bad singer. We're into the cans and the grog and all that to loosen up our vocal cords a bit. And we were sitting in the studio till about 2:00 that morning until we actually got it down and got the song sung. And mine didn't come out too bad. Calvin Templeton was hopeless. He was that bad. He had to talk it. If you listen to the album, he had to actually talk. He couldn't sing it. He actually had to talk the song. And Ray Shaw did Danny Boy. And so anyhow, they promised us big money and depending on how many album sales. And in the end, I think we got about $400 each for the album. But there's certain programs in Melbourne and on TV, like the Front Bar, they love bringing that up all the time. That stuff's always on the front bar.
It's good for a laugh.
It's good for a laugh.
Very good for a laugh. I want to talk about Geelong Falcons, mate, because, BT rolls out the Mick Turner Footy Factory, but of course I was a Geelong Falcons boy. That's how we know each other very well. I won't give you all of my success, but I definitely attribute, a lot of my development and probably... definitely my early stages of being an AFL footballer to Geelong Falcons, and you ahead of that, mate. So you've had some brilliant players come out of there. That's why they talk about it as the Mick Turner Footy Factory. You've had some brilliant players.
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't matter whether it's a school you're at or any private schools in Melbourne. There's some big private schools in Perth. Yeah, when you drive around Perth, there's a lot of them, isn't there?
Yep.
Big academies, big private schools, and the same in Melbourne. Where we had Geelong Grammar and Geelong College, of course. But look, any club's got to be proud of what they produce, and I wouldn't take anything away from the schools or any other academy program, whether it's the Sandringham Dragons or whatever. But the Falcons was during that era, unbelievably successful, particularly at a high end. Like Sam Walsh will probably be the next captain of Carlton. And I quote this all the time to people. So when that happens, we've produced 9 AFL captains.
Yep.
Now, there's no other program in Australia that's done that.
Yep.
And the higher level of players we've produced. So not only in draft numbers, but also in, how many premierships and Brownlow medals and Norm Smith medals and all that sort of stuff.
I think it's 3 Brownlows, 2 Norms, 8 captains, and hopefully Walshy gets the captaincy.
Yeah. So it's been a very successful program. And look, I put that down to the fact that we had, number one, we had a good region. So we had the Western District of Victoria and we had Geelong, which is a good region, really good schools in that area. But I attribute it to, there's only one person to get themselves drafted, and that's the player. Do you know what I mean? So if they buy into the program and we can help them in some way to get to a good level, like, for example, when you come between us and Geelong College. If you buy into the program and listen to our staff, you're going to improve. And people that buy in, that's what happens. And so I put our success down. I put my strength down to the fact that I was able to run a good program, but I was able to secure really good staff. I had good management skills, I think, and I had, particularly at the end, the last 10 years, I had really good, like unbelievable staff. People that should have been working at AFL clubs, but they had other jobs and they were happy to come and work for us. So I had really good staff. And if we had a high performance department working on their strength and conditioning, it was done really professionally. So that's why we were so successful. We could get a player, identify him early, and then work on him and get him up to a higher level. And that's basically because you had great staff.
I want to go through some of the great players that went through in a second, Mick, but because this is my podcast and you're with me, I want to tell some stories between you and I. So I do a few sportsman's nights over here, Mick. Hello to the ATO and people like that. Just run around and have a bit of a laugh. And I would say 90% of them I start with this story, and it's to do with you, actually. Right. So under 16s footy, Geelong Falcons, everyone in town, they get the letter in the mail or they get the email or they get the phone call. Mick Turner says, come down and try out for the Geelong Falcons. And everyone in town gets it. I'm talking all the Geelong College, all Grovedale and Highton and Belmont and the Hampton, everywhere, right? Warrnambool, every kid that can pick up and look up, looks like they can play football gets an invite. No invite for me. All of my mates down at Geelong Falcons. Anyway, the story goes, Mick Turner, and I'll tell you this in the third person, even though you see in front of me. Mick Turner is there, first day of training. I'm not there, not invited. But Mick Turner, there's a phone call, and he says, hello. And the person on the other end of the line says, why isn't Will Schofield down there? And you say, and excuse the language, Frankie, who the fuck's Will Schofield? Right. And anyway, person on the line goes, great runner, blah, blah. And I've never heard him. Hang up the phone. The next training session, bang, phone call. Will Schofield, nah, don't know. Anyway, 5 phone calls later, and there's a little bit of mayo on this, I know, Mick.
Yeah.
But 5 phone calls later, you finally go, just send him down, no worries, get him for a try, and you get off the phone finally, oh, God, this will be good. Some kid who can run will come out of training, give him a run around the oval, and then we'll send him on his way, give him a try. Anyway, I go on to play state footy that year, play almost 200 games for the West Coast Eagles and a premiership player. And the moral of the story is to tell your mum that you love them, because my mum was the lady on the phone that day saying, why isn't my son getting a go at the Geelong Falcons? True or false?
Yeah, you put a bit of mayo, and I think Jan only one phone call.
It was one phone call. It sounds better with 5.
And look, the younger they are, it's, at under 15 level, what happens is that the early maturers dominate that level. Like boys that have been through puberty early and they're men, or they might be a bit ethnic and they're shaving. They've just got such physical attributes that, the kid that hasn't been through puberty yet will struggle, just physically. So we used to do the under 15 program, but I didn't take a great notice of it. Where you started really tuning it up was about 16s level, what you're talking about. But you've got to give boys, they mature at different levels, and I was a late maturer myself. So someone might be a star like Luke Hodge at 16. Someone might take 17 like Jimmy Bartell. Someone could be 18. For example, Mason Wood, who's been till injured, a really good player at St Kilda. He took till he was 19. He didn't get drafted 19. So you've just got to keep the door open. And my attitude to it always was, and you're right, we used to always invite 100 boys at 18s level to the Geelong Falcons.
Not everyone was invited down.
Not everyone was invited. Well, there's a limit. Like the AFL would only let you invite 100 because you couldn't coach 200 kids.
Yes.
You could only invite 100, and they actually drew that back eventually to 80 because they said, look, 100's too much. You can only invite 80 in. So you would invite the 80 in, and everyone that got an email or a letter, it was letters early days. Karen used to do the letters and send them out, so you could sort of half blame her. But later on, it's all technological. It was all email, so everyone would be waiting to get their invite. In October, they'd go out for training to start in November, and you let's say you send 100 out. There'd be the odd kid that might say no for different reasons. It might be just the fact that it's a lot of travel, like a kid from Lorne. But then over and above that, you'd still get a lot of phone calls and you'd get a lot of, you get a lot of emails or back. Yeah. So I'd make a note of them, and we had a recruiting committee. So I'd send them the recruiting committee if it was Will Schofield or whatever. But you were probably earlier days. We probably weren't as organised then. But if someone pushes up someone's name, I'd go back to the recruiting committee and say, check this out. And they go, oh yeah, he's probably worth a try, and you'd bring them in. But you can't bring 130 kids in. So there's got to be a bit of a limit. So
you then have to get to blow a bit of smoke up my ass. I have to then go and do it.
It's
all good and well getting invited down. You got to train and play and do everything that you spoke about off the top, right? You got to have the 5 things and
well, you've got to have all that. But also, I think I had a good eye for it. We were always looking for the athletic players who we thought had the potential to play AFL. So my attitude to those players, and I'll give you a good example. Brian Myers, who's playing tomorrow against Fremantle. Now, he was with us as a 17-year-old, and he was just going. I don't think he even played a game for the Falcons as a 17-year-old, but went back to his local club, Grovedale, in the finals and had a really good, in the seniors and played really well. So, of course, we're going to bring him back the next year. So I don't know too much about Brian Myers. Never really seen him physically play because I've got recruiters to go and watch that stuff. I can't drive around Geelong watching players play all the time. I've got better things to do, like go and have a surf. So, so anyhow, Brian Myers comes in. This is the year when Ned McHenry, who's at Adelaide, and Sam Walsh are there, and they're really elite runners. And we're doing the 6K time trial out at Deakin Uni, which is a beautiful setup in Geelong. We used to be on the track there. And we're doing the time trial and the 2K time trial, and anyone you can get with near 6 minutes is a really elite runner.
Yeah.
So Walsh comes in nearly 6 minutes, Ed McHenry 6:02, and then Brian Myers comes in about 6:05. And I'm going, so you take notice of all that data that comes in. So my attitude towards Brian Myers then completely changes my mindset. So I go back to our staff and say, right, Brian Myers is going to make our list because his athletic ability in the time he's just run. He has got to prove to me and the rest of us that he can't play. So we're going to see if he can play, and we're going to give him every opportunity, because if he can play, he's going to get drafted on that time.
Yes.
So it's all about if you've got really elite attributes, you've nearly got to prove to us that you can't play. So and that can't play is probably 5 or 6 games. Yes. You know what I mean?
Did you teach him? Did you give him his kicking style?
Yeah, well, that was always very contentious, and I mean, that, again,
it's a good example of.
It's a great example. He got knocked senselessly, especially by people like Gary Lyon. Like they were relentless on him, weren't they, on his kicking style when he's early age? But he's only a kid. He's 18, 19, coming into the AFL. The game's quicker. It's about the speed of the game. You haven't got much time to set up. So he starts playing for us, and just like he is with Geelong now, he's doing things for us. Because we played him straight away, and he's kicking the ball around the corners and that. And then, of course, the staff come to you and say, look, do we need to teach his work on his kicking technique? I said, look, he's 18. I think it's a bit late. He's already formed that, that he's confident in what he's doing. He's executing really well at our level. I don't think we change it too much. You know what I mean? So we didn't go down that path, and then we started playing AFL football. It's got that unusual style. People are watching on the TV. Gary Lyon, all the commentators are into him. Well, they're not into him now, are they?
No.
Because he can kick goals. But the other thing with that funny little kick around, he can actually set up a lot of goals, can't he?
Set up a lot of goals.
So, he's not only a goal kicker, but he's a goal assist player. So he's been very successful at it. So
last insertion I want to make before we get through to this team of the century from Mick Turner from the Geelong Falcons. I reckon I'm going to be one of the only AFL players to train with a TAC Cup club, so the Geelong Falcons, and then play that week in the AFL. So when my old man John passed away,
I remember that clearly.
I rang you up. Yep. The funeral, Dad passed away. I played a game against Hawthorn. They came back, and the funeral was that week, and I basically Woosha said, "Man, we'll play you if you can find somewhere to train." So I was like, "Well, shit, where am I going to train?" Rang you, and come down and train with the Geelong Falcons.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
I think it might have been Parrish's year, maybe.
Yeah. I think it was Darcy Parish. But look, I got a really good long-term memory, and I remember that happening, and I still remember you sitting in the rooms. And I mean, obviously, you've come from an AFL environment, particularly West Coast, with the magnificent facilities they've got. And we had good facilities at Height and Reserve, but for our level. And I still remember you sitting in the room that night, and like all training nights, we'd have the vision up on the big screen, and we'd go through the edits. The coaches would, the main playing edits and the style of game we wanted to play, and have a meeting before we went out for training. And you're just sitting there amongst the group, really. very respectful and taking it all in and listening, and all the other kids are aware that you were there. Was great for us, and then go out and train with us.
I reckon I trained for about 3.5 hours that night. I was out there running around, and then you know what happened? I played against Richmond the following week, and I hit Jack Rewald off the ball. Got 3 weeks. So,
did you?
Yeah, Dad would have been proud of that, to be honest. Mate, so Geelong Falcons, this team, right? I want to know about it because there are some of the greats of our game in it, to be honest, Mick. And I know you've got a bit in front of you. So talk me through some of the guys that are in this side.
Well, we'll go from the back line. So I've picked
this is your selection.
This is my selection. Other people might be a bit different, but I got Stevie Baker, who played for St Kilda in the back pocket.
Yep.
Really good player. And one of the best and fairest at St Kilda. At fullback, I got Matty Scarlett.
Yes.
So, one of the greatest fullbacks ever, along with Silvani. So he's played in premierships at Geelong. Nick Maxwell.
Yes.
Nick Maxwell in the back pocket. Obviously premiership captain. And this is not a bad half-back line. I got Luke Hodge. He did a bit, didn't he?
Good player.
4 premierships, premiership captain. I got Will Schofield at centre half back.
Did ya?
Premiership player. Manny Maguire there for a while, but when you won the premiership, you had a crack at me and I put you in the centre half back. So it's your podcast, mate. I haven't altered it this morning.
I was going to say, I hope you didn't just put me in for today.
No, premiership. Jordan Lewis played at Hawthorn.
Yes, he's on the back flank.
Multiple premiership player. He's a Warrnambool boy. A little bit wild when he was younger. Centre lines, Travis Boak, who's been an outstanding player and captain at Port. Cameron Ling, premiership player at Geelong in the centre. Jimmy Bartell on the wing. Norman Smith medalist, Brownlow medalist, and premierships, multiple premierships. Half forward line's fairly good. Sam Walsh, will probably be the next Carlton captain.
Yes.
Jonathan Brown, 3 premierships at obviously Brisbane, and I actually got slipped Sean Higgins in there too. Sean Higgins was a good player. Had a lot of injuries at Footscray, but he was a really outstanding player at the Kangaroos. When they used to give him the ball just for elite skills and that. So he's there. People will hopefully remember Eamon Buchanan played at Sydney, premiership player in the forward pocket. Yep. At full forward, I've got Charlie Curnow. He goes all right.
Yes, I forgot about Charlie.
I told every AFL club that draft year he should be the number 1 draft pick. You heard that? You know that story?
No.
So anyhow, we get as at the end of the year, we'll just pause on this one. At the end of the year, all the AFL clubs are going through all the players. They're coming to see me, interviews and all that. So Eston rolls up, and Adrian Dodoro hates me telling this story because he's the list manager there. And they had 2 picks. They'd pick 5 and 6, and they're always going to take, because they needed a midfield, they're going to take Darcy Parish at pick 5, but they weren't sure who they're going to take at pick 6. And I said, look, you need to take Charlie Curnow at pick 6. In my opinion, just looking at talent, I don't know what the draft pool is out there. I don't know what's in Western Australia or South Australia, but if he's not the number 1 draft pick, I'll go he, because he could develop into anything.
So if he's at 6, you need to bloody get him.
Yeah, you need to get him at 6. And but anyhow, I couldn't get him across the line, so they took Aaron Francis. I'm not knocking Aaron Francis, but he played at Essendon for a while, and he's up in Sydney now, isn't he? But he's not Charlie Curnow.
No.
And if you put Charlie Curnow in the side at Essendon, they'd probably be close. They'd be a lot closer to that elusive premiership, wouldn't they?
Yes, they'd have a fall.
So they didn't take him, but it worked out well for him, because I think he went pick 12 or 13 to Carlton, where he was a little bit immature as a kid.
Right.
My wife used to teach him. Karen taught him at Torquay Primary School, and he's a lovely boy, but he's very boyish, and at that time he was a little bit immature, and he's still very boyish now, you know what I mean? I wouldn't call him a footy head. He's a bit like me. He's a surfer from Torquay, and he's got immense talent, obviously, and he's a great player. But so the lucky thing for him is he got drafted to Carlton. Of course, his brother Ed's at Carlton, who he could live with, and he could nurture him and bring him along, and that sort of stuff. So that's been a great thing for Charlie. But he's obviously a great player. So he's at full forward, and the other forward pocket, Scotty Lucas. People might remember him, but Essendon premiership player,
absolute gun.
And
who's in the ruck?
Right?
Who's in the ruck?
Where are we?
Up to?
No, sorry. So I skipped a beat there. I've got Curnow in the ruck. So in the ruck is Matty Primus. Matty Primus was captain of Port, so he was a great player. A player called Paddy Dangerfield, this ruck rover. Okay. So he goes all right, Paddy.
Yep.
Premiership player, captain of Geelong. The bloke at Rover's not a bad player either. He played in about 3 premierships, Gary Ablett Jr. Won a couple of Brownlows, didn't he?
Yeah.
So he's a good player in there. And then on the interchange, I've got Ben Cunnington, and the fact that he was a Cobden boy, but he won 2 or 3 best and first at North Melbourne. He was a great player.
Yes.
Lockie Henderson, another Geelong College boy from Birregurra.
Premiership player with him.
He was a great player. Gary Rowan, premiership player. Well, people would forget about Christensen, but he also played a premiership. I've got Stewart. Look, I've got Stewart, Tom Stewart on the bench. You know what I mean? He's probably got to get elevated, I'd say.
I reckon, mate, maybe might be dragging me after the first minute of play. Put Tom Stewart on the field.
He doesn't play centre half back though. But who do you take out on the back flank? You take out Hodge, you take out Jordan Lewis.
That's a good point.
It's a hard one. So he's on the bench with Jack Stephen, who played at St Kilda. He won 4 best and fairest for people that. Now the new talent I can't even get in there is like people like Darcy Parish, who's at Essendon. James Warple, who's won a best and fairest at Hawthorn. Tom Duday until injured was a great player. Sean Darcy, that's all new talent. I can't even get him in yet. Yes. Sean Darcy will probably eventually get in there. Jack Henry, Brian Myers. There's a lot of good players. Tanner Bruin, Ollie Henry, who's playing tomorrow. I can't get them in yet. So in that side, there's 8 AFL captains. When Walsh gets picked, as we said, there'll be 9. 20 premiership players, 20. 3 Brownlow medalists and 2 Norm Smith medalists. So it's not too bad.
It's bloody impressive. Who was the best at Geelong Falcons? Not who's the best player. We know what they've done at AFL level, but as a junior, who was the best out of all those guys?
Well, Will Schofield.
Very good.
No, the best player was, and I tag it, as you said, at the Falcons, when you see him at the Falcons, because a lot of players improve when they go on, whether it's Matty Scarlett or Jonathan Brown or whoever it is, but it's Luke Hodge easy. Because when Luke Hodge came into our program, what happened to Luke Hodge is he played with us as, in under 15s, and as a 16-year-old, he started playing senior football in Colac for Colac Imperials in the Colac District. Then Colac got wind of him. He came in and started playing with them. And I thought, look, we're going to get that kid out of local footy. He's too good to be doing that. And he's played with us as a 16-year-old in 2000 on the MCG, because they used to play the finals on the MCG then. Yeah. We played before Essendon when they won the premiership. So in 2000, he played on the MCG when we beat the Eastern Rangers when Sam Mitchell was playing. And as a 16-year-old, he just killed them. So not many 16-year-olds playing a TAC Cup team. He was kicking goals over his head and everything. And as a 17-year-old, you were able to take, in those days, every AFL club could take one 17-year-old as a draft pick. Yeah. And obviously Hawthorn took him the number 1 draft pick. He had a few injury problems as a 17-year-old, a few groin problems and that. But I still remember going up to Hawthorn. This is another sort of story that's been told a lot. And it's a true story. We go up to Hawthorn with the coach at the time, Damien Christensen, and Hawthorn are interviewing us. So we go into the room. Peter Swab's there, the coach. All the recruiting people are there, John Hook and the rest of them. And they've got 3 names on the board. They've got Chris Judd, Luke Ball and Luke Hodge. Yes. And he said, we're here to discuss these players only because we've got the number 1 draft pick because they traded off, what's his name, to Fremantle. What's his name? Big centre-half back.
Crode?
Yeah, Crode. Trent Crode. I traded him off to get the number 1 draft pick. So they got the number 1 pick and they said, well, what do you think, Mick? And I said, look, I'll talk about Hodge in a minute, but Chris Judd's going to be a great player. But at that time, he had 2 shoulder operations. So there's a bit of it, and he was 18, a year older than Hodge. There's a little bit of doubt about him, but, obviously got drafted to West Coast and got out of the blocks very quickly as, superstar. Yes. No doubt about that. Luke Ball was 17 and he was still going to Xavier College, so wouldn't be able to play a full season of AFL football because he was at a private school. He was 17 and wasn't super quick, but he was still a great player too. And then, of course, there was Luke Hodge. So we spoke about Luke Hodge for a long time, as we did with the attributes and all that sort of stuff. And in the end, it went to and fro. And I said, what do you need at the Hawthorn Foot Club as your number 1 draft pick? What do you actually need? They said, I still get a bit emotional talking about it. He said, we need a player that can go in the midfield and get the ball out of the centre. I said, okay, what else do you need? So we need someone that can go down back and shore us up down back and set up the play down back. And if we're in really big trouble, we need someone who's going to push forward and be able to kick us a goal. I said, that's Luke Hodge. Rest history.
And look what he did. Yep. They took him. He led their club. And I assume he was I've met Hodgie a few times, so good bloke, good person, good family.
Knockabout, yeah.
Good family.
Yeah. Well, he was a real colic boy. In the country, which people would know, especially back in those days, a bit of a culture of having a drink with your mates and all that sort of stuff. And I got no problem with that as long as it's done in the right context. But I many times in the property steward's room at the Falcons used to take him in there one-on-one and just tear strips off him. And, just because he was just such a super talent. And and look, when you look back and look, there's even controversy at AFL level now, and I get it to a certain extent, whether you're talking about the Hawthorn racism controversy or whatever with clubs. this is what happens in clubs, and it happened at our club too. You would have a very, very talented player within your club, and you knew if he did everything right, he would get drafted. Okay, so we would have meetings with those players if they were doing the wrong thing, if they were drinking or out with some bad eggs, or we weren't that happy with his girlfriend and what his girlfriend was, what parties they were taking him to, because we used to follow him on Facebook. Okay, so we would do the same thing if AFL clubs did, and it was done in this context. So we would get the player in and we'd interview him. And it's, as I said, not much different to what's probably being portrayed in some AFL clubs, but it was done in the right context because we wanted to get the best result for the player. And in his case, if he had the talent to get him drafted. Or at AFL level, you want the player who's on your list to play, if he's talented, great AFL football, don't you? And I'm not saying this is right and that's wrong. So we used to go into meetings. So I'd be in the meeting. I'd have my football manager there and also the coach there because you want them to speak as well. But more so, if anything's said, you want witnesses about what's being said in the meeting. And, I'd go pretty hard at the players, and call them out for what their behaviour was and give them a fair rev. And there was various times, to quote examples, where it wasn't so much Luke Hodge, I'd do that one-on-one, but later on with players like a Devon Smith or someone like that, I'm not saying Devon Smith did the wrong thing, but he might be in games just being a little bit selfish in his play or whatever it was. But we'd go into meetings and I'd go pretty hard at some of the players to trying to get the right result. Or so like you're mucking around with the wrong blokes, this is getting posted on Facebook, you can't be out drinking, doing all that sort of stuff. You're only 17 AFL clubs are going to see it. And we'd finish the meeting and the player would walk out of the meeting. I'd turn to my football manager and my coach and say, how do you think that went? And they said, look, it went really well, Mick. Everything you said was exactly right. It's just the way you said it.
I reckon I was on the back end of a couple, maybe. I don't know, maybe. I was a pretty good kid.
No, you were a good kid.
So I know you got a few things to do today, so I'm going to wrap this up in just a couple more. When you look back on it all and just hearing you talk about Hodgie, you must have great pride in looking at these guys' career. Like that team you just read out, you personally, how do you look back on that? Is it with pride?
Yeah, absolutely. Someone asked me a weird question the other day. What do people know you more for now, your AFL career or your Geelong Falcons career? And I say, look, 100% my Geelong Falcons career, because when you're walking around anywhere, the only people that recognise me now have got to be basically over 50, do you know what I mean? And watch Geelong up until about 1988. Although if you search on YouTube and Google and all that stuff, there's a fair bit of stuff on there. Correct. But, you've got to be aware of it. But, because of the publicity the Falcons used to get, the clubs now don't get that amount of publicity. Like it has diffused a fair bit in Victoria. The TAC Cup used to get a lot of publicity. Like it had its own TV show on a Sunday, like the Rising Stars,
yes,
and all that sort of stuff. So, and there's a lot of vision of it. And we actually played on the MCG in the final. So it was, a very, very big competition. And when the draft came up, and no disrespect to any other state, the TAC Cup used to get 60% of the draft, which is a lot. They don't now. Because other organisations, whether it's, say, Western Australian Footy League or the academies that you work in, have got better at it, haven't they?
Yeah.
We were funded at the time and were well funded to run those academies. Like we were funded well. We got $500,000 into our budgets from the AFL, and then I'd raise money through sponsors and that, and I'd work off a budget of about $800,000 to run the Falcons. So it was a good budget.
Yeah.
Other academies, whether it be West Perth or whatever, their academies wouldn't be running on anything like that, but likely to run on 100,000 if they had that. But when I look back, it's probably it's the Geelong Falcons because it's ongoing. The players are still playing, and Brian Taylor, who's a great mate of mine, I will say that BT's a good mate of mine. We sort of set that up, and I'd text him different things.
The law mafia down there.
He'd give us a fair bit of publicity. I'd sit at home watching the TV, and if we were playing, say West Coast had playing, well, on West Coast we've got, at the time Schofield's playing and they're playing Geelong, and there's 10 Geelong Falcons players playing out there, and he'd roll all that stuff off. So we did get a reasonable bit of publicity, but as soon as I retired, I said, that's it. No more mention of any of that sort of stuff. No more factories. Give someone else a crack.
I work for Fox Footy now, so I might keep rolling it out, Mick. Mate, it's been brilliant chatting. I wanted to, if you're up for it, just to touch on your health, mate. I know you went through going through a bloody battle for your life, right? Pancreatic cancer. Can you talk a bit about that? What that period's been like?
Yeah, it was a little bit crook. At the start of last year, it basically started last February. So I was I was feeling a bit crook, a bit gastric in the front of me. And the pancreatic cancer is a really interesting one because it doesn't get a lot of publicity, but it still kills 3,500 Australians every year. And most people who get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer die, within a couple of months because it shows itself up really late. So your pancreas sits at the back. It's right next to your liver. And if you get pancreatic cancer, it goes into your liver, you're gone. So there's just nothing you can do. And I know of cases of people who have been diagnosed and died in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and usually 6 months. So in my case last year when I was diagnosed, if I couldn't have gone through this process, I would have been dead within 6 months. There's no doubt about that. So what happened to me is I got jaundice for a start, which it's when you turn yellow and your eyes turn yellow. I just came home one day to Karen and I wasn't feeling that well. And I was outside and she came out and had a look at me, said, geez, your eyes are yellow. And then I pulled down my togs because I'd been surfing a lot and, you got a good suntan and, even the white part of where my togs were, my skin was yellow. So the reason I torn jaundice was because my gallbladder wouldn't drain through my pancreas because there was a tumour in there. So I went off to St John of God in Geelong and got diagnosed with that. But the jaundice made me really sick. There's this thing that builds up in your body called bilirubins, which makes you really itchy because of that yellowness. There's a build-up of this bilirubin stuff. So it makes you really ill and you get really itchy and you start scratching your skin. And I was actually scratching the skin off my body. I was that itchy. Even the soles of my feet were itchy. So hospitalised for that. They put a stent in me to drain the gallbladder through my pancreas so that it would drain through my digestive system to get those bilirubin levels down. And then the next thing is once they've got that under control, the only way you can survive pancreatic cancer, you've got to have an operation called the Whipple procedure, which is 9 hours on the table. So it's one of the most complex operations you can have. So in my case, they took out my gallbladder, half my pancreas, my duodenum at the top, which is the top of your intestines, some membranes, some veins, and then believe it or not, they replumb you back the other way, cut a hole in your stomach, poke what's left of your pancreas back into your stomach so you don't become diabetic and sew you up. So that's 9 hours on the table. And when you're on the table, like to get to it, they take, when you're on the table to get you, they actually lie on the table and take all your organs at the front out. So they take, all those organs at the front to get to it. So it's a massive operation. So I got through that. Did my recovery, actually got out of hospital in a week, and then it's ongoing pathology. So blood tests, CT scans, PET scans, all that sort of stuff. And then, so the theory is the operation gets the tumour out of cancer, but then you've got to go through a really big round of chemotherapy to kill what's left. So any residual cancer cells that are in your bloodstream, they've got to kill those off. Now, anyone that goes through chemo, and there's different levels of chemo, it's a nightmare. I had chemo for 7 months. And because it was pancreatic cancer, it's got a bad habit of coming back. I had the highest dose you can possibly have. So I was in the Epworth Hospital basically for 6 or 7 hours, Karen, we were, on a Monday. Had a port in my shoulder. So I had 2 drugs put in on a Monday, another drug in a bottle, which I had to take home on Monday night, plugged into this port here in my shoulder. And I had that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I was on chemotherapy 3 days every 2 weeks. So I did four big doses, and I was 80 kilos when I started, and I dropped to 63. So I dropped 17 kilos, and I was that crook. So I went back to the oncologist and said, listen, if this cancer doesn't kill me, your chemo is going to kill me. I can't keep doing this. He said, no, you're really crook. I'll give you a month off. So she gave me a month off. I started feeling really good again. So then I'm in for the next 4 doses. And the next 4 doses, they cut it back a little bit. You go to 80%. And then I had the last 4 doses where they take one of the drugs out. So instead of doing 3 drugs, you do 2. And the only way I could get through the 4 doses was to name it after my 3 grandkids, and one of them sitting here, Frankie. So the first dose was Frankie, then it was Ziggy, then it was Raph, and then it was me, and then I'd finished it. So that was October last year. And that was a battle, wasn't it, Kaz? It was a really big battle to get through that. So started putting back on weight and all that sort of stuff. But the statistics are, when you're diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, only 3 out of 7 survive 12 months. If you can't have the operation, you die. So 7 people die, so only 3 survive. And the total statistic, and this is what they do in cancer, so it's always judged over 5 years. So if someone gets breast cancer now, there's a 95% rate they'll survive for 5 years. Or for prostate cancer for a bloke, 95% chance that you'll survive for 5 years. Prostate cancer is 10% survival rate for 5 years. So 1 in 10 survive. So I'm still going through that. So I've ongoing blood tests and ongoing CT scans and PET scans. My blood results have moved a little bit up, but the scans I've done with the CT scan, there's nothing showing yet. But in a CT scan with any cancer, it doesn't show up until it's about 1 centimetre big. And if it does come back, then I've got to make a decision whether I'm going to just roll with it or go back and have some more chemo.
I read a quote from you saying that you didn't necessarily fear death, but you feared losing the quality of life and your family and all of that.
Yeah, that's the big one.
You must feel bloody lucky. That's what I was telling you off air. My brother passed away at the end of last year with AML, acute myeloid leukemia, and same thing. Same sort of statistics you're rolling out, right? And he wasn't one of the lucky ones. So you must feel bloody lucky.
Yeah, up to this stage, I really treasure life, and I'm lucky. And look, the thing, it's hard to describe to people. I'm 70 in December, and I've had a really great life and an interesting life. And I don't want to go, but I don't fear death. And my father said the same thing to me when he was 69 and crook. He was a really strong Catholic, and he said to me he didn't fear death. But what I do fear, and people have got to realise, it's your fear of your quality of life, because when you get that crook, you sort of go into a bit of a bubble. You just want to feel comfortable, you know what I mean? You feel that bad. You sort of I used to lie on the couch a lot, as my wife would say, muck around with my phone, but just lie on the couch just so I felt comfortable. You just want to feel comfortable. So it's all about quality of life. If you take away, I feel really crook, and that makes you grumpy. And I'm grumpy to my wife, Karen, and you can't relate to your grandkids properly and your own children and your friends and everything. I can't go surfing and do the things I want to do, and I'm lying on the couch. I'd rather not do that, without being too dramatic about it. I'd rather not do that. It's all about quality of life for me. And if you lose your quality of life, well, it's and it's a big decision people have got to make, because I saw when I was doing oncology, you'd see people come into the oncology ward to get their treatment, and I'd see people come in, older people than me, that were diagnosed with incurable cancer, and quite a few of them was pancreatic cancer, and they were getting G'd up to and everyone's different, to get their chemotherapy, because they wanted to, maybe they weren't as organised in their life, and maybe they needed more time to get a few things done, get their finances in order, or get their family in order, or whatever it was, their personal affairs, and they were going to have the chemotherapy to buy another 6 months. But I used to look at them, being spoken to by the doctors and the nurses and stuff, and sometimes I feel like getting off the table and go over and say, if I can give you any advice, I wouldn't do chemotherapy if you're inoperable. I'd just try and be as well as you can and have a good quality of life, because all the chemotherapy is going to do for 6 months. It might prolong your life 6 months, but you're going to feel like crap. And it's not going to be all that enjoyable. So it's all about that. So, it's an interesting one to go through. And it was a very, very challenging year last year. There's no doubt about that. I had a lot of things. And one of the things in my mind is that, and without being grotesque or anything, is that when I was lining up to go in, and it was a really funny feeling when I was going in for this operation, the Whipple, because what happens in the Whipple when they open you up, once they open you up and they get to your liver, the first thing they do is check your liver. So if your liver's got any signs of cancer in it, they'll do a biopsy. If it comes back positive, they won't operate on you, they'll just sew you up. And that's usually a 3-hour procedure for that. The whole operation's 9 hours. So I said to Karen and my sons, I said, look, if I'm out of here in 2 or 3 hours, I'm in a fair bit of trouble, because they can't operate. But if I last 8 or 9 hours in there, well, they've been able to do the operation. And I remember waking up in the ECU and looking at Karen and saying, how long was I in there for? She said 9 hours. I said, that's good. They've been able to do the operation. But as they were wheeling me in, I couldn't believe the starkness of the operating theatre, because it was just a big operation. They had some machinery in there, and they had anaesthetic into me, and they were just about to give me the big anaesthetic, the epidural that goes into your back. And as soon as they hit you with that juice, you'd sort of collapse onto a nurse, and then they lay you out on the table and that. And I'm looking at, it's funny things you do in an operating theatre. It was like psyching myself up for a really big footy game. Like I knew a big operation was coming up. It was like you getting ready for a grand final. Like, you're getting that state of mind. You're really inwardly thinking about things, and you're psyching yourself up, because this is going to be super challenging, and it's hard work, and the recovery is going to be hard. But if you get through it, it's all worth it, because I've got a premiership, or I've got through the operation. It's that exact same feeling. So I drew on that a lot. And I remember sitting there just before they put the epidural in and put me to sleep, and I'm looking over at the nurses, and they're lining up all the hooks that they're going to open me up with. Like they like butcher's hooks. Yes. There would have been 200 of them that they were counting and lining up. And I'm looking at these hooks going, God, they're going to be putting those hooks into me and open me up with those hooks, you know what I mean? It was just bizarre. So funny things that go through your head.
Well, I'm going to finish at that because I know you got to go grab on. I'm going to jump on a ferry, go on the river. Is that what you're doing?
Yep.
So before you do that, so while you've been speaking, I do this a bit while I'm interviewing. I'm sort of listening along. I think it's very interesting you speaking about your footy career and you feeling like you're a big game player, and Karen can probably say you were as well. And perhaps played your biggest game over the last couple of years with your life, right? And you were able to step up, and I don't know, you played a good game somehow, mate, in the jaws of defeat. So, mate, brilliant chatting to you. I could literally chat to you for 3 hours, I reckon. But I'm glad you reached out.
Yep.
I want to thank you for what you did for my career. Even though you didn't get me just as a 15-year-old, but we eventually got there, didn't we, Mick?
Well, I only reached out to two people that come over here. You've always been good to me, and Sean Darcy has too, so I reached out to both when I was here. And I mean, people get back to you, they do. If they don't, they don't. But you're in Perth. I think it's a bit rude not to reach out to people. But yeah, the big game stuff, it's to me, the big game stuff is when you go surfing, you catch a really good wave, like that 8-footer.
Yes.
And or you're playing on the MCG in front of 90,000 like you did. Another big game for me, for your Western Australian viewers, is when we used to come over and play the state games against Western Australia. They were massive games. That was very, very exciting. And then, of course, other things in your life, your grandchildren, and of course, the big one was last year with pancreatic cancer. So hopefully I can keep playing for a while longer.
Bloody good. Let's keep watching the Geelong Falcons lads go about their business in the AFL. I certainly enjoyed doing it as well, Mick.
Thanks.
Big thanks to our sponsors, Paywise, powering the podcast this year, TABtouch, ID Athletic, Whippersnapper Whisky, Mamba Digital, Shelter Brewing Co, Leadable Precinct, and Camera Electronic. All of our stuff is over at backchatstudios.com.au. Mick Turner, everybody. Did you have fun?
I had fun. Thanks, Will.
Good job.